started off in the top left with Emily Carney. She is a former nuclear technician for the U.S. Navy and accomplished space journalist. She's the manager of public engagement and social media at the Space 3.0 Foundation. She's also the founder of the popular spaceflight group Space Hipsters. If you're on Facebook, you've probably heard of that before. She's also the co-host of Space and Things and co-author of a book that I'll mention here in just a second when I talk about Bruce. Bruce McCandless III grew up in the shadow of Houston's Johnson Space Center during the Apollo and Skylab eras. He watched Batman and Buzz Aldrin with equal enthusiasm, so you might have to get out here for the Smallville Festival. He received his master's and Juris Doctor. He's the author with Emily Carney of Starbound, a beginner's guide to the American space program, from Goddard's rockets to Goldilocks planets and everything in between, which just came out. Highly recommend. Bruce also wrote Wonders All Around, the incredible true story of astronaut Bruce McCandless II and the first untethered flight in space, which we'll have some pictures of later. And then last but not least, astronaut Don Thomas, who's part of astronaut group 13. He received his Bachelor of Science in Physics, and then a master's degree, Master's of Science degree, and a doctorate in materials science, way more science than I think I could ever handle. He flew on 4 shuttle missions, STS-65, STS-70, STS-83, and STS-94. He also worked at AT&T Bell Labs, which is a pretty cool thing. He is currently a speaker and educator. So welcome to our panelists. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to just start sharing the screen. Can you guys see that? The screen here. So the shuttle, the shuttle program obviously came at the end of the Apollo era, end of Skylab. And it was a pretty unique beginning. It was the first time America actually tested a rocket for the first time with humans on board. Before that, we would test the rockets without humans on board. So it was a pretty bold choice to start off the program. We're going to just start it off just with some kickoff questions for the panel. And we've got some pictures that are just going to roughly go along with what we're talking about today, just to give you guys a little idea of what we're going to be doing. So like right now, we're coming up on the 44th anniversary of STS-1. It was in April. The 35th anniversary of the Hubble mission, and then the 30th anniversary of the first shuttle near docking. Obviously, I mean, we did incredible science with the shuttle program. There was a lot of firsts, the first female astronauts, the first astronauts of color. Astronaut Group 8 was a pretty unique group. Aside from those historical developments, and we'll start it off with Dawn here. What's your favorite memory or moment from the shuttle era? It could be personal, it could be professional. Want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I got 2 moments. First one I'll tell you is happened on April 4th, 1983. I was able to see the launch of STS-6. That was the first flight of Challenger. And this is the first time I ever saw a rocket launch in my life. I was 27 years old. I had never seen a rocket go up. I'd always wanted to. I wanted to be an astronaut since I was a young boy. But I wrote to John Glenn, who was my senator, and he sent a car pass for the causeway at the Kennedy Space Center. So I watched, that first launch of Challenger from, about 10 miles away. And I remember standing there watching it climb into the sky. I could see the fire, the bright flames, the smoke. I could hear the roar of the engines. And it was just the sound waves were just pounding on my chest. And it finally dawned on me. I said, wow, there's people in there. And I had just been watching the technology and instantly I was connected with there's human beings inside that thing. How amazing was it? And that was just an incredible moment for me to see that. And equally incredible was on, July 13th or July 8th, 1994, my first launch. And I was 39 years old. I'm strapped into Space Shuttle Columbia, laying on my back. 6 seconds before liftoff, the main engines come up to full power. Everything starts shaking. I could hear the roar of the engines. And then right at the moment of liftoff, we light the solid rocket boosters. And I felt a shove in my back, like somebody had their hand in the middle of my back, just shoving me up into the sky. And when I felt that push, I knew I'm on my way somewhere. I hope I make it to space, but I knew I was on my way. The computers couldn't shut anything down at that point. And I had my helmet on, visor down. Nobody in the world could hear me. And I'm screaming inside my helmet, Yahoo! Like, go, go, go. Because this is the dream of my life, and it's taking place right in front of my eyes. Such an incredible moment.
Yeah, pointy end up for that kind of launch, you would hope. Emily, what about you?
Oh gosh, is the question like your first shuttle related memory when you fell in love with the shuttle? Oh gosh, well, my first memory of the shuttle, I'm amazed I even still remember this. I was a toddler, but I grew up not really far from the Space Coast. I grew up on the other side of Florida, and when I was a kid, the shuttle was brand new. My mom's like, "Hey, let's go outside. The shuttle's going up." It was on the news. And sure enough, seconds later, you saw this, you could still see it visibly, not as big as being on the shuttle, like Don Thomas, but you could see it visibly from a distance. You could see it go up and curve over the horizon. And I was like, holy crap. And I had the same, it's funny because I had the same feeling as Dr. Thomas that, oh my God, there's people on that. That's insane. And years later, I was like, "What launch was that?" Because we just moved to Florida, and I must have been 3 years old, and I figured out it was STS-2. So that was the first launch that got me hooked, and I became a huge space geek from toddler age. So I just got obsessed. I had every shuttle toy you can think of. But yeah, just that was my gateway into space flight. Big time was the space shuttle. That was the program of my youth, and I still love it.
We could always bring that up later too, just the cultural impact that the shuttle had, because it was around for 3 decades. So pretty incredible. Bruce, I have a feeling I know what the answer is for this one, but
well, yeah. So seeing Bruce McCandless II flying the MMU was the man maneuvering unit on STS-41B was a big moment for sure, and seeing the launch of STS-31 in 1990, I got to see that one in person down in Florida, and that was a beautiful sight, and it had a lot of the same feelings that Dr. Thomas and Emily had in seeing a shuttle launch, and I will tell you one story that's kind of funny. I think I was in college at the University of Texas in '81 when the first shuttle went up, and I was in a sort of a hardcore Marxist sociology course, and our professor was a pretty strident leftist, and he got the idea that some of us were restless the day the shuttle came back because we wanted to go watch it, and he was incredulous. And he said, how many of you people want to go see that monument to American capitalism? And a lot of us raised our hands. And he said, look, anyone wants to go see that reactionary display of technological machismo, you're welcome to do it. And of course, about 95% of us got up and filed out and went and saw the landing. And just sort of a testament to how much Americans were looking forward to being back in space and having our astronauts up there doing constructive things. And I always remember that day.
That's pretty cool. So obviously, we've talked about those first few flights. This is a picture of STS-1 here on the screen right now. Actually, Chuck will switch it over here for everybody in attendance. We've talked about how it's like a bold beginning. What do you guys think would be, obviously there's some risky parts to the shuttle's design. Could we have done something different? Obviously, there was some Air Force requirements and all that good stuff in there. But looking back at STS-1 specifically, what stands out? We'll start off with Don. What stands out to you about that mission?
It's the first time, as you mentioned earlier, John, that we launched a rocket without testing it out first, without astronauts on board. So just to watch it go up, I was just watching the technology. I was amazed at the capabilities of the space shuttle. And that's what I remember most. I was glued to my TV, and the day STS-1 landed, I was a grad student working on my research, and I left, the lab early and went home and had my small black and white TV and watched that come down, and I was just cheering at the TV. It's like, wow, way to go, America. We're back in space, and we had a great, great future, building space stations and deploying satellites to look forward to.
Then we're going to switch it up just a little bit here. So obviously, shuttle helped us do some incredible science, but there's also some firsts. And Bruce, Emily, this one would be more for you guys, just to start it off here for astronaut group 8. What was the significance of the shuttle program just broadly for the space community?
If you want, I can get started on that. Astronaut Group 8 was the first astronaut group ever. Well, first of all, it was geared towards the space shuttle because there was it wasn't just pilots. They had a lot of different scientists. They had doctors, etc. So that it was really geared to, okay, we're going to do science aboard the space shuttle. It's not just going to be, fighter jocks, flying this space plane. Although the first few missions were, pilots, the test flights. And it was the first diverse astronaut class that really reflected the United States. For the first time you had women astronauts, you had African American astronauts, and there was one Asian astronaut as well, an Asian American astronaut. So the class looked more like the United States, whereas no offense to the panelists during the Apollo days, it was all, middle class Caucasian guys, and it was all predominantly, not all, but predominantly a lot of test pilots. And like I said, that's not all inclusive. There were many Apollo astronauts who were not test pilots, but so yeah, it was really the first class where they allowed some diversity in. And in this picture, we see Sally Ride, who was the first U.S. woman astronaut to fly in space during STS-7. So that really made the class special. And another thing that made the class special was they encompass like the whole shuttle program, really. I mean, I think Anna Fisher was part of the programs from shuttle to I want to say the first Orion mission. So yeah, they had a lot of influence on really the entire many different generations. So I hope that answers it. I think that's what made them very special.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Bruce, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I think it was well said, Emily. I think as Americans, it was a testament to this idea that we take the notion of equal opportunity seriously, and we want our space program to reflect the population. And if you're a woman, or if you're an African American, or if you're Jewish American, and you are talented and hardworking, then you can be part of NASA and part of the astronaut program. And I think that was a really important step for us, and it was a way to advertise the virtues of the American system to the rest of the world. You mentioned that Sally was the first American female astronaut. Well, the Russians had sent up a female astronaut back in the 60s, but then for many years, there were no female faces to be seen in the Soviet and then Russian space program, and so their commitment to including women was really more theatrical than it was real. And in the meantime, we managed to integrate women into meaningful roles, and maybe culminating with Eileen Collins commanding a space shuttle flight, eventually an important one. So yeah, I think it was an important step, that selection of that group.
And then Don, this next one's for you. Obviously, the shuttle also opened up some opportunities for international collaboration as well. Did you have any experiences personally with astronauts from other countries?
Oh yeah, I trained with astronauts from Japan, Canada, Europeans, and I flew with Chaki Mukai. She was the first Japanese woman in space, and I flew with her on my first flight. So I did a lot of training over in Japan. I did a lot of training at our partners in Europe as well, in Canada, and it was a great thing. I mean, the shuttle program opened up the space program to more the average citizens, to scientists, to teachers, people like that. It also opened it up for our international partners, to participate. And, that was a big stepping stone, I think, getting to the International Space Station. We couldn't have the International Space Station without the partnerships and relationships that we developed, during the Space Shuttle program.
And speaking of those, the laying the groundwork for the station is figuring out how to do the science in space. We were laughing before we started recording that this is obviously going to be your wheelhouse to talk about here next. But actually doing science on the shuttle, what was that experience like for you with a science background, with AT&T Bell Labs experience, all that? Like, what was your favorite part of that too?
Yeah, my background is a research scientist. I worked at Bell Labs doing research there. So for me to get assigned to my first mission, it was a Space Lab science mission. I was thrilled about that, because I knew that this is the laying the groundwork for our later developments for space stations that were still more than a decade away. So it was pretty exciting. And on my first mission, we had 200 some experiments from all over the world. And we met with the principal investigators from each of the experiments, trained in their labs. So it was an incredible international experience. And it just brought, again, this international flavor, we're one planet, we're all Earthlings, and we're working on this flight together. So for me to work on the Space Lab in a module back in the payload bay, that was just a lot of fun for me. A lot of great experiments that we were able to do.
The one reason I included this picture is I love just kind of how the perspective, when you're in space, there's really no up or down. That's why I included this one here, because it really does show like the Space Lab that you're talking about in the aft section of the payload bay there for everybody here in the audience. Another cool thing that the shuttle did was just allowed people to look out the window and see incredible things like this. Do you have any recollections for things that you saw when you were on orbit that stood out to you?
I saw many hurricanes, as you see here, and we would fly over the top of them. And to look straight down at this picture you see right now, look right into the eye, seeing that from above. The first time I saw a hurricane swirling like below, you're not looking at any motion, but from the structure of it, it looks like a whirlpool. I'm looking out the window and I was holding on with both hands like white knuckled, because I had the sensation that if I let go, I was going to get sucked into that whirlpool. That could never happen, right? We're 200 miles above the Earth, but that was the feeling that I had from that. Another cool view I had out the Earth on my first mission, I'm looking out at nighttime and I could see city lights down below. And as I'm watching the cities go by, I see a little zip of light go by really fast. And I thought, what was that? What did I just see? And I thought about it, and then it dawned on me, it was a shooting star. Here on Earth, when you want to see a shooting star, you have to look up at the sky. In space, when you want to see a shooting star, you have to look down at the Earth, because, shooting stars are burning up, meteorites are burning up maybe 30, 40 miles above the Earth, and we're flying 200 miles up. So see that first time, you say, wow, it makes sense. Of course, they're down below me. But the first time you see it, you just say, wow. And there's so many of those wow moments as you orbit the Earth.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of it. I never thought about that, but that's a pretty fascinating idea.
Yeah, a very interesting vantage point for that. You talked, a little bit about like how it was just somebody pushing you in the back when you were launching. Did that experience ever change? I mean, you launched 4 times. Did it ever get old?
It never got old, and the first time you launch, there's a little bit of a fear factor. If anybody's seen the images of Space Shuttle Challenger blowing up, you know that this vehicle might blow up. It probably won't for me on my day, but it could. So on all 4 of my flights, I was a little scared in the back of my head, maybe 10% scared, 90% excited. And it's that scary feeling like you might have going on a great roller coaster. You're a little, as you strap in, you're a little anxious, you're a little scared, but you're just excited about what you're doing. So on all 4 flights, that little piece of scariness never goes away. But what was different on the first flight, there's a little more anxiety. Like, how is this going to be? How am I going to feel when I get to space? Am I going to be sick? Am I going to get dizzy when I return back to Earth? So there's all these questions that you can't answer until you get up there the first time. When I flew the second, third, fourth time, I knew how I was going to feel. I knew what the experience was going to be like. So that unknown quality, that little anxiety you may have from the unknown was missing, but always that little bit of fear factor. And I'll say this, any astronaut who tells you that they're not scared during launch, they're either crazy or they're stupid, because you should be a little bit scared if you do something like this. It's just respecting the risk that you're taking.
And, this might just be as good a time as any to talk about, like tragedy, obviously, with Challenger and Columbia. Bruce, Emily, these would be, let's get you in here. How do you think the program evolved after Challenger and Columbia? I mean, there were two totally different types of failures, but obviously the safety culture evolved. Can you guys speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, Emily, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I'll get started. I think after Challenger and Columbia, obviously, I think mostly Challenger, because during the 80s, if you look at shuttle history, during the 1980s, there were really very many ambitious plans for the shuttle program. Some of them were pretty wild. I'll just give a few examples. They were going to do launches out of Vandenberg to do polar missions, like Department of Defense missions. They were going to put a liquid stage on the shuttle at one point. That's Shuttle Centaur, which I won't get too into that because it's kind of technical, but there's a ton of risks associated with that. And that was basically to launch interplanetary payloads that were really heavy and had to go a real long way into the solar system. That's just two ideas, but there were a lot of very ambitious, ideas for, the shuttle's going to be able to do this. And part of that was the pitfall that, in the 70s, the shuttle was advertised as this is going to be able to do everything. It's going to be able to do, the shuttle is the answer to everything, and it's reusable. So after Challenger, NASA, it kind of is an understatement. They got way more risk averse, obviously. They began to see that maybe having these polar missions inserted a certain, from Vandenberg, which had a different launch site from Kennedy Space Center, obviously, a differently constructed launch site. There was a few added layers of risk to that. And, putting a liquid stage on the shuttle, for many reasons, might not be the greatest idea, so obviously the program became more risk averse. If you look at the first return to flight mission after Challenger, it was I think that one of the guys from that mission called it a really boring, it was a TDRS satellite deployment, very kind of a boring mission, but they started very sort of like, we're going to play it really safe this time. And I think over time, I'll try to wrap it up. Over time, unfortunately, they got a little less risk averse. They didn't quite. There was known issues with the foam on the external tanks, hitting the heat shield, and unfortunately, that led to the Columbia tragedy happening. And I do want to say, that even though that was a known issue for a long time, after that happened, NASA did investigate it, and I think they handled the investigation with Columbia a lot differently from Challenger. I think they were a little more open, a little more emotionally sort of connected with that, the way they handled it. So I wouldn't say it got rid of that risk entirely, but it definitely mitigated it. So you did see how NASA over time, really tried to mitigate as much of the risk as possible. And, they tried to make things as right as they can. I don't want to make it this a bash NASA thing, because the shuttle, despite all its flaws, was an incredible program and it did a heck of a lot. So,
sure.
Bruce, what about you? And then we're gonna.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I would say that even apart from the safety issues, one way the American space program evolved after. And because of the shuttle program is NASA decided, hey, we don't need to be in the business of launching commercial satellites. And eventually the decision was made to, hey, we're going we're going to privatize that and to the extent possible, and let American know-how and ingenuity and private industry get involved in that business, and it's paid off. It took a while, but SpaceX sort of has a chokehold now on the international commercial launch market, and that's a good thing for the American economy. For a while, as Emily pointed out, the federal government wanted the shuttle to be all things for all people, and that included doing a lot of military work. And after the Challenger disaster, the Pentagon decided, hey, maybe we want to do our own launches and run our own affairs, and so they started taking back some of their launches, and we have ended up with more conventional rockets handling a lot of the Department of Defense stuff, and that continues to this day. They use SpaceX rockets quite a bit, and others. So there were, aside from the safety considerations, there were some other dimensions to what happened as a result of the Challenger accident.
So we're going to change gears again here and go back to some science. One of the other awesome pictures that I found while prepping the deck for today's chat was a picture, for those of us who remember Comet Hale-Bopp back in the 90s. Don, I didn't know this until we were chatting earlier. You actually took this picture.
Yeah, this is April 6th, 1997, aboard Space Shuttle Columbia. We happened to launch just right around when the comet was at peak brightness. And so I remember, that first moment, the sun is setting, the sky is black there, and I spotted the comet. And we took a series of pictures, and as you would watch the comet here over about 15 or 20 seconds, it would get lower, 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 and finally it dipped beyond the Earth there. And I'm just staring at the blackness of space, and I thought, wow, I've just seen a comet set. I've seen sunsets, I've seen moonsets, but here I got to watch a comet set beyond the Earth. And the cool part was 90 minutes later, I could see it again and again and again. So Mission Control did a special thing. They let us point in an inertial attitude directly at the comet so that we could take longer exposures of it to pick up, images of the tail that you see here. And that means that if you look at some of the other pictures, and this one at the lower right-hand corner, you may see some orange streaks down on Earth. Those are, fires that were burning in West Africa. So they're streaks because we are pointed directly at the comet, and we're traveling 5 miles a second. So anything down on Earth is going to cause that streak. But it was just a great opportunity to be in space to see a comet like that.
I would love to be able to do that. One more thing before we start talking about some other science. Obviously, coming back to land in the shuttle, it was a pretty steep approach profile. A few months ago, we did a presentation on the X-15 and how that was a similar landing profile to what the shuttle did. But basically, for those who didn't catch that, the shuttle basically in the X-15 would descend from like the height of a commercial airliner down to touchdown in about 90 seconds, give or take. What was landing on the shuttle like? We talked about the launch, but was there anything unique about the landing?
For me, the approach is very steep, as you mentioned. I rode on the shuttle training aircraft, a number of times, and I remember the first time I did that, I'm standing right behind the pilot who's flying at, and it looked to me as if we were going straight down 90 degrees. It wasn't. It was like a 18, 19 degree slope, but it's so different from the nice gradual, maybe 3-degree approach you would do in a commercial plane, that it appeared to be straight down. All I saw out the front window was just the Earth, no sky at all. But you get used to it as you do it over and over again. The landing on the shuttle, it's about 55 minutes from when we fire the engines to slow our speed until we touch down. And the most of that, we're just a glider. It's a very smooth flight coming in. Every now and then, a little bit of turbulence, but I've been on rougher commercial flights in my life, and it's very quiet. And as we were coming in, I pulled my headset away from my ear just to see what's the sound out there, and I could just hear the whoosh, Like if you were on a glider or sometimes on a commercial plane, you'll hear the whoosh of the air as you're taking off or coming down to land. And I could hear that. The landing itself is pretty hard. The shuttle is falling fairly rapidly. When the main gear touches down, there's a big thunk. It's like the roughest landing you've ever been on in any commercial plane. But I would always say to my commander, oh, did we land? Because they like to think it was like the perfect smooth landing. So we would touch down, and then a few seconds later, the nose gear would slap down. And when that came down, I was thrown forward in my seat. My shoulder harnesses would lock up, just like if you're in your car and you slam on the brakes, your seatbelt and shoulder harness will tighten up. This would tighten up for us. But you definitely knew we're back on Earth again. And it was in a really exciting moment coming in. But the launch, a lot of shaking, a lot of vibration, a lot of noise. The landing, very quiet, very smooth, little bit of turbulence, but very quiet coming in.
Very cool. Bruce, we're gonna kind of change gears and talk a little bit about your dad here, who's seen in the picture right here.
Yeah, there he is.
And he got to do something pretty incredible. You'd mentioned earlier. Why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. Back in 1984, my dad, Bruce McCandless II, and another mission specialist named Bob Stewart, who was the first Army officer to fly on the shuttle, tested the jetpack known as the Man Maneuvering Unit. It was a cold nitrogen fueled device that had basically propelled its user around through the expulsion of the nitrogen gas through a total of 24 thrusters positioned around the Man Maneuvering Unit. And this was sort of the culmination of many years of work at NASA. Back in the 60s on the Gemini program, NASA had tried a couple of different things to get astronauts to move around outside the spaceship. One was the so-called handheld maneuvering unit, which was a little wand that expelled compressed oxygen, and then Ed White used on his Gemini spacewalk. And it worked okay, but it was hard to find your center of gravity and therefore hard to control your flight. So they decided they wanted something a little bit more formidable, and that was called the astronaut maneuvering unit, which was a hydrogen peroxide powered jetpack, similar to the old Bell rocket belt of the early 60s. And that was going to be tested by Gene Cernan on one of the Gemini missions. He never got to test it because he never made it back to the compartment of the Gemini capsule where the AMU was kept. He overheated basically and was near the point of exhaustion, and so Mission Control ordered him back to go back inside the capsule, so he didn't get to test it. But this machine, which my dad worked on for many years, worked beautifully. It was later used on a couple of shuttle flights to go out, to have the astronauts go out and capture a couple of, actually a total of 3 malfunctioning satellites, a Solar Max satellite on one mission, and then two errant communication satellites on another mission. And the machine worked well. I think it was probably a victim of the safety culture that NASA adopted after the Challenger tragedy. And I'm not an engineer, so I don't know whether that was justified or not. But for a while there, it looked like the MMU was the machine of the future, and there were all sorts of predictions about how the MMU-wearing astronauts were going to be building the space station and that sort of thing. And that future never came to pass. But I would point out that a lineal descendant of the MMU, the so-called SAFER device, is used by astronauts still on the ISS as sort of a life-saving measure in case they were to become untethered from the space station and need to fly themselves back to safety. So that's sort of a summary. I hope I didn't go too fast on that. A summary of the MMU and the mission back in the 80s.
And those pictures were of your dad, and then this one is of, I think this was Rob Stewart on this picture.
Yeah, I think that's Bob Stewart. So Dad had the red stripes on his trouser legs, and Bob Stewart's were unadorned. So I think that is Bob Stewart. Yeah.
And Bruce, I had a credit card for many years that featured your dad on the MMU, the iconic picture, and that was one of my favorite credit cards ever.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah. That image ended up on all kinds of things, including a pair of yoga pants I saw one time at the airport. So a woman went by wearing MMU yoga pants. So
it's one of the most iconic images, I think, of the Space Shuttle program.
Yeah, good. Emily had a picture of that on her wall growing up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I had the poster. I want to say, I could be wrong. I think I got it at the Scholastic Book Fair. If you were a kid in the 80s, you had $5, you were like dangerous at the Scholastic Book Fair.
that's
So I
right.
think I got it. Yeah, they used to have really cool space. They had I think a Discovery poster, just a launch poster that I got as well. But yeah, I had that, and I had the MMU, the famous picture on my wall. You couldn't, yeah, you had to. You had to do it.
Okay.
Well, this good old Scholastic Book Fairs. We're gonna have to keep it moving along here just because we are coming up against the end of our program here today. But another big legacy of the shuttle was the Hubble Space Telescope. Bruce, your dad was also on this mission, and speaking of images that have been on everything from yoga pants to book bags, shirts that I'm wearing right now, are some of those iconic images from Hubble.
Yeah.
Briefly, I mean, just in, few sentences, what do you think was the most important thing from Hubble? I mean, aside from we also serviced the telescope 5 different times, so we were able to prove that we could do that.
Yeah, that was amazing. And there's last time I checked, something like 21,000 scientific papers have been written based on data from Hubble. And I no way I can speak to the dimensions, the scope of that research. But I will say Hubble was instrumental in sort of proving the existence of black holes by imaging not exactly a black hole itself, but the swirl of gases around a black hole, and contributing to this theory that black holes are at the center of all of our galaxies. And there's just a whole host of things that Hubble has done. It really is sort of a space celebrity and one of the most important scientific instruments of all time, I would argue. Don probably has more to say about this than I do.
Well, just that image that you have up there right now with the Hubble, we took that image. I think it took them 8 days to capture that. And, in an area of roughly the size of the disk of the full moon, we discovered 15,000 galaxies.
Yeah. Wow.
Each galaxy has 10 billion stars. We think every star has multiple, planets around it like our sun does. And these galaxies are evenly distributed. Wherever you look in the sky, day or night, you're looking at 15,000 galaxies roughly in that area of the full moon. And so I think the Hubble also just opened up the universe to us, and it made you appreciate, hey, there's got to be other life out there. Look at all these billions of galaxies with billions of stars. I mean, it just kind of propels you and keeps you looking, for that contact in the future.
Yeah.
Especially because this was a patch of dark sky too, that there really wasn't anything we could see from Earth where they did the deep field images. So it's just remarkable that this is what came out of that.
That's one of my favorite pictures from Hubble, just because of the scope of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still up there, still chugging away. So,
as a kid who grew up in the 90s, I just was fed a steady diet of Hubble images and those old printed NASA, educational materials that they used to hand out. So one of the other big firsts we mentioned earlier was Eileen Collins, who was the first female shuttle commander. She's seen here. Another space telescope was launched during that mission. Emily or Bruce or Don, does anybody just want to speak to any of these missions real quick?
Don, I'll defer to you. I do notice Steve Hawley, a Kansas native there, so-called attack astronomer, along for the ride. Yeah.
I was in the astronaut class with Eileen Collins, and she's one of the classiest individuals I've ever met. For all of her accomplishments, being the first female pilot on the shuttle, first female commander, she should have an ego bigger than the universe, but she doesn't. She is still down to earth. I saw her last month at a Shuttle Fest program by the Kennedy Space Center, and I watched her interact with students and just the public in general. And I thought, what an incredible individual. And she just made me really proud to be an astronaut and to be in that astronaut group with her. I have nothing but great things to say about her.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've talked about, obviously, is that international legacy, and we're going to just kind of wrap it up on these. Obviously, the shuttle laid the foundation with those, the shuttle Mir missions for the shuttle building the International Space Station. Is there one thing, and we'll ask everybody real quick, one thing that you think will be like an enduring legacy of, the shuttle constructing the station or of the International Space Station? Emily, we'll start with you.
One thing that I think will endure, um, I'm trying to think. It's hard for me to say, just because I mean the ISS is still it's still in space. I mean, it's still you can go outside at a given time of the night, probably, a few times a month, and you can actually view it. Um, it's been continuously crewed, I think since 2000. I think Bruce and I talked about this yesterday on another podcast. Um, there's not been a time in 25 years, a lot of young people, like my niece and nephew, there's not been a time where, they've been alive where somebody hasn't been in space. That's pretty incredible. And, it also goes without saying, and I'm not a scientist, but, the probably the thousands and thousands of science hours and the things that they've discovered that happens to the human body up there, that's very useful for, hopefully, we keep talking about going back to the moon, we keep talking about going back to Mars. I won't get into the political and all the other stuff, the logistics about that, but if we're going to do anything long term in space, we have to have data that shows, okay, people can actually live for a while in space, and the ISS is the thing proving that, and the shuttle was directly responsible for that. So I hope that answers the question. That's really a big thing to answer, just because I mean it's still around. The ISS is still around. It's something we can still see, and people have literally grown up with it.
And for me, John, it's that peaceful cooperation in space, without a doubt. We've got many countries, 15 different countries, all working together on one goal, a peaceful goal, cooperating. And I think that's going to be the greatest legacy. We could use more of that down here on Earth.
Bruce, if you want to bring us home.
Oh yeah, no, I was going to say something similar to what Don was saying. We, despite the international tensions resulting from the invasion of Ukraine, we've managed to keep things on a civil, professional basis up there on the space station. I think it bodes well for scientific cooperation in the future, and let's hope it continues. It's a great project.
I agree. And with that, one real quick thing, where you can see shuttles for those of you in the audience, California Science Center right now, you can't see Endeavour because they're building a very cool new setup to actually show what a full shuttle stack looked like. So I'm gonna have to make it back to LA and brave the traffic to go see Endeavour again once that's done. Discovery is at the Udvar-Hazy Air and Space Museum. So in DC, or at Virginia, I guess more properly. Atlantis is in Florida. Thanks to Bruce for sending this one. It made it easier than me having to go through all of the pictures I took last time I was there. And then Enterprise was at the Udvar-Hazy, and now it is actually out at the Intrepid Museum in New York. And it's enclosed now, but I just loved this picture of the size of an orbiter on a World War II, Korean War era aircraft carrier. Is just pretty cool. And with that, we'll land the presentation here and open it up to questions. Obviously, thank you to everybody for joining. Don, thank you for being here and answering some questions that none of us could give an answer to. So that's been great. And we'll open it up to the audience for questions here. Quiet group here this morning. What was that? The comments were very interesting. If Don, I'm going to ask, if given the chance, would you go up again?
If I got a ticket to go to space, the first thing I would do with that would be I'd offer it to my wife, because she supported me when I was an astronaut for 17 years. So if I had an opportunity, I'd give it to her. If I had 2 tickets, I'd give one to my wife and one to my son. And if I had 3 tickets, I would join them, because I would love to go up to space. I didn't get enough of looking at the Earth, And I'd like to see the changes that have occurred. The last time I was in space was 28 years ago, and I'd just like to see more. You never tire. You never tire of looking at the Earth.
Bruce or Emily, do you guys have questions?
No, I didn't know I didn't know we'd have a chance to ask
Sorry, I'm calling it
questions.
awful.
I feel like I'm kind of starstruck here. I've enjoyed listening to Don and finding out a little bit more about what it was like to be in space and seeing shooting stars from above. I never thought of that. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of starstruck too. Just the comet story is really amazing because I never thought about I never thought, in my mind, like, what's it? I've seen, comets from Earth, and that's pretty cool. That's kind of neat, It's like, wow, but I never thought about what it must be like to see one from space and that it would set. Does that make sense? Like that's really cool, and that picture, of course, is just like exquisite. So yeah, when you talked about that, I was like my jaw was like on the floor. That's really cool. I mean,
there's
yeah.
so many of these wow moments when you're in space like that. I think any human, if any of us were up there, you see the comet, you'd be going, wow, look at that, or look at the shooting stars, or looking into the eye of the hurricane or the top of Mount Everest. You're constantly saying, wow, up there. It's a fascinating place.
Well, I have
I'll ask one question. What do we agree that the legacy of the shuttle is a positive one, or I mean, I think it is, but I guess there are people out here who continue to sort of think, oh, maybe that was a wrong turn for the space program. I sort of disagree with that notion.
I think we learned to work in space. We learned to do spacewalks. We could never be doing what we're doing up on the space station without all the EVA experience that Bruce's dad was involved with, and the other astronauts. So we really learned a lot. We learned about the human body in space for long durations. So the shuttle program, I think it's a incredible legacy. We didn't walk on the moon, but that's not what we were doing. We were trying to do benefits, for here on Earth. And I really think its legacy will be opening up the door for the future. So when we go to Mars, we're better prepared for that. We got better spacesuits. We got EVA training for that, and we know what happens to the human body on these missions. So I think it's a very positive note. And some people who don't think that the shuttle program was worth it, there's some people who think that the Earth is flat. And I can sit here and tell you I have been around the Earth 692 times. Every single time it was round. So there's people believing all kind of stuff, and I'm not fazed by that. They can have their opinion.
And one other thing too, I mean, like Bruce, for me, my generation, I grew up, was born in the late 80s, grew up in the 90s. For me, I got to see the shuttle all the time. It's one of the things that got me interested in space. So I think just the cultural legacy is something that you can't really put a price tag on. The number of people that were inspired to be in the program or to be in the space program in any way, I don't think you'd be able to count it. I do have one more question. We'll wrap it up on this. We kind of skipped over this slide earlier real quick, but I noticed when I was putting these together that, Don, you were wearing a boot.
Yeah, John, you got a good eye, and thank you for pausing at this picture for me. What happened here, this is in training for STS-83. It's going to be in April of 1997, and we were down at the Kennedy Space Center for our practice countdown that typically takes place a month before our launch. During training, egress training, practicing leaving the space shuttle in an emergency on the launch pad, doing that training in Houston a few months earlier, I had broken my ankle. And so I had a boot on. I originally had a cast and then a walking boot. And I was doing extensive physical therapy, 7-8 hours a day, working to get back in shape. They were training Katie Coleman as my backup in case I couldn't make it. But just a few days after this practice countdown, again, about a month before the launch, NASA officially cleared me for the launch. That the doctors were said, yeah, that's fine. Everything looks good. We can go with that. So it's not every day that I wear two different shoes like that, but this is a boot for a broken ankle.
Well, if there's no other questions here in person, thank you guys again. If we could give them a round of applause. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
And thanks to the Cosmosphere and everybody in attendance. We'd love to be there in person with you, and I'll be there next month, and I think in January or in July as well for some of the camps. So I look forward to seeing a lot of you there.
I'll have to come say hi when you're out here then.
Looking forward to it.